The Oklahoma Girl Scout Murders, Part 2. Learned today about something that happened at the camp prior to the girls' arrival. Well, it was definitely red flags for parents. Also, you're going to hear about what it was called the trial of the century. This and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster, what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting. Well, hello and welcome to part 2 of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. Hey, first let me say thank you for listening. There have been thousands of downloads for our crime talk, and each and every one of you are appreciated. Hey, I would invite you to reach out with a shout-out. Email me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Hey, you might want to make suggestions. Maybe have some questions, or you might even disagree with some of the things we've said. Whichever, my friend, you're welcome to contact us. Heck, if you just want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. Now, we do try to answer every email, and to those who contact us this week, we will respond not only with a note back, but a digital gift of appreciation. Yep, a digital gift of appreciation. I promise you, you're going to like it. Hey, do me a favor. If you've been following our episodes or even a new person, go to your podcast platform, leave us a 5-star review. This way our program gets into more hands. It's funny, the more that you do that, the more our podcast gets out into the areas. Your help that way would be appreciated. In fact, we already know that we have people listening not only from the East Coast to the West Coast, but even in other countries that listen to Charlie Crimebuster. We really appreciate that. And there are some of you who have said, hey, how can we help you? How can we help you guys do what you're doing? Well, I'm glad you asked. You can go to peacemakernetwork.com, peacemakernetwork.com. You can join us in giving our support to law enforcement, the first responders, and the military. See, we support our nation heroes with this nonprofit organization. And for as little as $3 a month, 3 simple little dollars a month, you can become a badge supporter, BADGE. And everybody that joins with us this week who says, I want to be a badge supporter, well, we're going to give you a vacation voucher worth $500. Hey, you have up to 2 years to use it. Again, that's peacemakernetwork.com. Also, if you'd like to get caught up with past episodes, say like part 1 of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, well, you can go to charliecrimebuster.com, charliecrimebuster.com. Now, don't worry if you did not catch those digital links. We're going to post all 3 of them in our show notes. Now, last week in part 1, we introduced you to Camp Scott, the Girl Scout camp. Beautiful camp there in the wilderness. Even when you're driving into the camp, you're under just about a tunnel of trees. And a beautiful, beautiful place, swimming, hiking, all those good things that people do at camps. And the camp had been in existence since 1928. The murders, well, they happened in 1977. But prior to that time, thousands, I'm telling you, thousands of girls had wonderful experiences at the camp. Then tragedy struck. We told you about the 3 girls, the 3 little precious girls. There was, of course, Lori, who was smart beyond her age. Her dad was a doctor there at the ER room in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She could cite the Pledge of Allegiance as almost an infant. She skipped 2nd grade. She was a smart young lady who was full of life. And then there was Michelle, who loved her mother, wanted to be a math teacher just like her. Said, hey, by the way, when I'm leaving, make sure you take care of my African violets. And then there was little Denise, the daughter of a brother cop. Sent her to Girl Scout camp. Had no idea that she would not be safe going there. Yep, little Denise. She even sold cookies to pay her way to camp. Did not want to go to camp because those of her friends that were going with her, they backed out. But she was there. And then we took you through the night of the murders into the early morning when the bodies were discovered. Now we're going to take time now to share with you about some suspicious activity that happened before that week of camp. But before we do that, it's time for us to share with you what we call our Crazy Crook Story of the Week. You see, we try to share a Crazy Crook story in all of our episodes to kind of lighten the load because these are heavy things that we're talking about. Well, this guy, though, his robbery is in the height of dumbness. You know, I'd have to put these criminals among the world's dumbest criminals. And I guess they even deserve a trophy for being dumb. Now, you know and I know that robbers always try to look for a secure way so that they can get away from their place where they've done their deeds ASAP, as soon as possible. But my friend, these robbers, well, they were out of mind. It seems that they were not in a hurry to get away with their stolen luxury. You see, these robbers just underestimated the most important aspect. As least the important, guess what? Well, they did the robbery successfully, but their getaway vehicle, oh my, it was a 10-year-old donkey. Not a car, not a bike, not a motorcycle, a donkey. And even that donkey was not their own. They kidnapped it, loaded all the robbery on the back of the donkey. And there, of course, was all that stuff that they had to help them out in their escape. Well, fortunately, the donkey, well, he, I guess, was a little wiser than these two closed-minded, stupid criminals. And he started making that noise, that donkey noise. And listening to the noise, well, officers came out. And they looked and saw the whole situation going down. Well, then the robbers, well, they ran away, leaving the donkey behind and all the stolen food and rum. Yes, my friend, these robbers who tried to escape police on a donkey are indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crooks of the Week. Now back to our main focus. There were some other crazy things that were happening at the Girl Scout camp. That was prior to the arrival of the girls. You see, the camp had sponsored what they called a cadet week. It was a week to teach leadership to young ladies. In fact, some of the counselors that worked the camp attended those leadership classes. And during that week, that was prior to the week of these terrible murders, well, some really suspicious activity took place. One of the young ladies was walking along the trails when she looked up into the trees and she saw, well, what appeared to be a little stick man that had been somehow put together there in the trees. And it was hanging in a noose from the tree limbs, hanging in effigy. Well, that startled her. It scared her. And while others just laughed it off, well, it put quite a bit of fear in this young lady. Then there were those who were staying in what they called the staff house. And it was reported one night that this one lady, she heard someone in the woods making noise. Then later, someone scratching on the screen. She thought, well, somebody's just trying to scare me. She said, though, it worked. She was scared. And during that same week of cadet camp, well, one of the tents received a slit. Yep. A little slit was cut, about 3 foot, in the back of the tent. It appeared to be a peephole for someone to look through. Next comes the most terrifying of all. Some of these young ladies were returning to their tent when they looked inside, and wow, they were surprised. It was apparent that someone had ransacked their tent, threw things everywhere, taking some things here and there, scattering it out on the property around the tent. A little ways out, there was a donut box that they had brought, but no donuts were there. They were missing. But guess what? Something else was left. There were some notes. On one of the notes were the words, kill, kill, kill. Another note said, we will kill 3 girls in tent 1. Did you hear what I said? The note said, we will kill 3 girls in tent 1. Well, they took this immediately to the camp director. The camp director, well, she thought, yeah, it's just somebody playing pranks. She threw those notes away. They could later have been evidence, I guess. Now let me ask you, if you had known about the suspicious activity that I've just described to you, would you send your 8, 9, or 10-year-old daughter to that camp? Well, the truth about it is the parents never had to make that decision because they were not told about this activity. And one of the mothers of the slain children, well, she said if she had just been made aware of the one thing, the slit in the tent for the peephole, if she had just known that that had taken place, she would have not sent her child. And the director in hindsight, who had been told about the notes, she said if she had known about the slit tent, then she would have handled it differently. But wow, think about that. She would have gotten bothered by the slit tent, but at the same time, she thought the notes that read, "We will kill 3 girls in tent 1," was just a prank. Oh, my friend, there's something wrong with that picture. Again, let me ask you, if you had been told about this suspicious behavior, someone cutting a peephole in one of the tents, someone scratching on the screen of the staff house, someone going through the bags of campers, someone leaving a note that said, "Kill, kill, kill," another note that said, "We're going to kill 3 girls in tent 1," would you have sent your kids to that camp? These parents never knew about that, and their children were brutally murdered. You know, my friend, I believe that many of us have become numb to the word murder. We see it on TV. We read about it on social media. We even play digital games where people are killed throughout the game. But the reality of it is that 3 precious girls were killed. Little Lori Farmer, she died of blunt force trauma to the head, which led to skull fractures. She had lacerations to the head, and she received injuries consistent to rape and sexual assault. Michelle Gomez, she received multiple blows on her body. Her wrists had been tied. Her eye slits were swollen. She had 3 sets of skull fractures with a T-shaped abrasion to her upper jaw and neck. She, too, suffered injuries consistent to rape and sexual assault. Precious Denise Milner, she was kept alive the longest. She had been taken into the woods, had been raped and beaten. She had massive contusions, skull fractures. She had abrasions to the right side of her face. She was strangled to death. These girls died violent deaths. So, my friend, not making a big deal about that suspicious activity, it was a deadly mistake. Responding to the scene that early morning of the murders was a highway patrolman and then the local sheriff's department. For sure, it was a horrible scene that first responders faced that morning. Unfortunately, my friend, the local sheriff's department probably was in over its head. Sheriff Pete Weaver, well, he did not have a lot of law enforcement training. He had been a local businessman. He had ran a restaurant. He ran for sheriff, and he won. While no one could say that he did not care and did not have the community in his mind and his heart, well, it was his lack of experience with these kinds of murders that negatively impacted the case. The crime scene was terribly compromised. All sorts of people were walking throughout the scene. While it was right, as I mentioned last week, to get the girls from the site and get them away, it would have also been proper procedure for them to remove others rather than those that were absolutely necessary to process the scene. There should have also been a contact log that would have logged every person who had entered the crime scene. You see, that way you could at least explain any intrusion to the scene. Otherwise, a defense attorney could use that to argue, well, someone else did it. This would come back to haunt them in the trial. Now again, Sheriff Weaver, he was passionate about getting justice. He certainly was. And I don't doubt his sincerity at all. I believe that he wanted to do everything he could to get the person or persons who done this. Very quickly, though, he announced the suspect. Now, the suspect was well known in the area. He was a Native American Indian who had been a local high school football star who had turned into criminal activity. He actually lived in the area of the camp, and he was already, get this, a fugitive from justice. You see, it was in June of 1966 when Leroy Hart, our suspect, had abducted 2 pregnant women in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He abducted them from a parking lot of a Tulsa nightclub. He eventually drove them deeply into the woods back near where he lived, and he tied them up and brutally raped them. He actually left them tied up with a knot, tied in such a way that if you tried to pull against the knot, it would grow tighter. In other words, my friend, he raped them and he left them to die. However, one of the women did manage to get out of the rope trap, freed the other one. Hey, as an important side note, on the way there with one of the women in the trunk, the other in the car, well, he kept trying to own the women's glasses. It appeared he had a thing about women's glasses. Now keep that little bit in your mind. Well, Leroy Hart, he was caught then, and he confessed to the deed. And he was convicted of first-degree kidnapping, rape, and sent to prison. But amazingly, our suspect of these murders, well, after he did that first crime, he got early parole. And while out on parole, he violated that parole with more crime. And so, he was sent back to complete his prison time. But in order to try him on the other charges, well, they had to bring him from the prison back to Sheriff Weaver, Sheriff Weaver's county jail, to stand those charges. So, as you can see, this suspect was known to Sheriff Weaver, because, my friend, it was there, previously, that he had escaped from jail. He was on the run for several days when someone then talked him to turning himself in, which he did. And then get this, 11 days after he turned himself back into the jail after escaping, well, he said, nope, don't like jail. And get this, he escaped, hold on to your seat, escaped a second time from the same jail to the embarrassment of Sheriff Weaver. This man, Leroy Hart, had been eluding police there in the area for about 4 years now. That's right, 4 years on the run. And he lived in the area where the Girl Scouts were murdered. And there were some things around that area that tied him to the site. You see, they had located that next day, after the murders, they located a large flashlight that had been left at the site. You know, one of those with a handle and a big battery in it. And across the lens, well, was material like a garbage bag, and little holes was pierced in it. See, my friend, that way would dim that large light. Gave you just enough light to see where you're going, but not enough light to call attention from others of the light. That light was found at the scene, and there were people that had testified that Hart had used this type of light when he was about stealing things. Also, in the light's battery compartment, there was newspaper that was stuffed in it that would keep the battery from striking the side of the department and making noise. So this flashlight was rigged to be in stealth mode. Now, interesting enough, that newspaper that was stuffed into the light, well, it was also found in a cellar-like cave located on Hart's mom's property, not too far from the murder scene. Get this, the same newspaper that was used to stuff that light that was found at the crime scene was found back at the cave cellar on Hart's mom's property. The exact same newspaper. Now, also in that cave-like cellar, there was some photographs of women. You see, these photographs, they found out, were photographs that Hart had helped the photographer develop when he was in prison. That was his prison job, to be assistant to the prison photographer. And so he had practiced and he had developed those photographs that they found in the cave. So that again tied Hart to that cave that was not far from this crime site. And in that cave was also a pair of glasses. Remember what we talked about? How he liked to try on women's glasses? And those glasses were tied back to the very same cave. And on the wall of that cave where they found this material, there were words that said, quote, "The killer was here." The killer was here. Now, on top of that, the knot that was used to bind little Denise, the same type of knot was the same type of knot that Hart had used in his past criminal act of raping 2 pregnant women. Now get this, the same knot he used when he kidnapped and raped those 2 women that he was charged for was the same type of knot that was found on little Denise Milner that night. Pretty convincing stuff, right? Well, not so fast. There's another side to the story. You see, Hart was a Cherokee American Indian. He was a local high school football star. And many in that area, well, they now felt that he was being framed for this murder. You see, Hart had embarrassed Sheriff Weaver by escaping out of his jail not once, but, twice. And he had stayed in the area on the run for 4 years, eluded the sheriff and his deputies. He had, in fact, become a legend, almost a folk hero for his skills of evading capture. In fact, it was near the area of the old-time crime sprees of other people like Bonnie and Clyde, those others who had too eluded the police and became folk-like heroes. And there is a fact that there was bad blood between Sheriff Weaver and Hart. You see, after these terrible murders, well, Sheriff Weaver stated publicly, he said that if he saw Hart, he would not be bringing him in alive, no matter what. And that if any of his deputies brought him in alive, Hart, that is, that he would fire those deputies on the spot. You see, my friend, that just added fuel to the fire, that maybe the sheriff was just trying to frame Hart of these murders. Now, speaking of finding Hart, well, the sheriff could not find him, even though he was the subject of a large manhunt. And eventually, the Oklahoma State Police was brought in to help find him. 10 months had passed and no Hart. There was the thought of local people were helping Hart, that they, in this large Native American community, were trying to help him outrun the police, to avoid the lawmen that were out to frame him, at least in their mind, for these murders. Now, there was also talk that was steeped in Cherokee tradition that Hart could do what is called skinwalking. Yep, skinwalking. In other words, that he could take the form of an animal like an owl to escape his captors. Well, finally, after 10 months, with the help of an informant, Hart was arrested at the home of a local medicine man, American Indian, about 50 miles from the scene of the murder. It was not Sheriff Weaver's crew that caught him. And by the way, he was not brought to Weaver's jail where he had escaped a second time. This time he was taken straight to prison to await trial. And then comes the trial. On March 19, 1979, 22 months after the murder, this was called then the trial of the century. Hart was on trial for the murder of the 3 little Girl Scouts. Well, the courtroom, it took on the atmosphere of a coming O.J. Simpson trial. The court was full, evenly divided, with those who were positive that Hart was guilty of this crime, and others who believed that he was framed, that the evidence was planted. Now, lots of the evidence presented was indeed circumstantial evidence. There was, of course, the flashlight, which was similar to the one that others had seen Hart use. There were photos of the women that Hart had developed from his prison job that was found in the same cellar cave that had the words written, "The killer was here," on the side of the wall. There was also women's eyeglasses found there, yep. The prosecution said those came from the Girl Scout camp. Remember when we talked about he liked to try on women's eyeglasses? And there was the way that the knots were tied that held little Denise, similar to the knots that Hart used in his previous crime. However, That part could not be brought to the jury because those past criminal acts was not allowed in the trial. There was also a moment in the case that was not unlike O.J. Simpson case when Johnny Cochran, remember, when he got up and he said, "If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit." Well, you see, there was a print on the flashlight that was recovered from the scene there. And there was a bloody footprint on the floor of the girl's tent. Only problem for the prosecution? They could not tie that fingerprint to Hart. And the footprint they found was a size 9.5. Hart's full size, foot size, was 11.5. So the defense lawyer, he brought this catchy phrase to the trial. He said to the jury, "My client cannot manufacture a footprint to match your case, nor can he shrink his feet." Those comments stuck with the jury. What the jury was not told was that the print was smudged. It could not be contributed to anybody. It could have been Hart's thumbprint, but you couldn't know because it was smudged. And what the jury did not know was that that trial, well, maybe they did know this, was so compromised, the scene of evidence was so compromised with people walking around that footprint could have been anybody else's. And those photos they found in the cave there, well, one person from the sheriff's department, well, he told others that those photos were in the sheriff's desk after Hart had escaped. If so, how did they get back in that cave? Was Hart really a part of a frame-up after all? Well, hang on to this one. The trial lasted 11 days. The jury was out only 5 hours. Trial, 11 days. Jury deliberated only 5 hours. They came back with a not guilty verdict. The prosecution was stunned. Sheriff Weaver said after the verdict that he was still 1,000% sure that Hart was guilty of killing these 3 Girl Scouts. Those on the jury, though, they said the investigation was shoddy, that they did not believe that the prosecution presented enough evidence that Hart was guilty without a shadow of reasonable doubt. However, my friend, do not think that Hart got away free even though he was not guilty. You see, he was still on charges for his past crimes. He had over 100 years left on his past sentence, and now even more charges of escape on top of that. He was sent back to prison to serve out a sentence. And while he did not get the death penalty in the Girl Scout murders, he did, though, see death. You see, not too many months after back in prison, he died of a heart attack, exercising in the prison yard. By the way, just to give you an idea of the kind of support the Hart did have in the community at the time of the trial, well, at his funeral, over 2,000 people showed up. His funeral was held in a large public arena. So, let me ask you this. Was justice served? Many think that karma had its way with him and that justice was served. Others still think he was framed, just because of his criminal past and his native heritage. But officially, my friend, the case was not solved. It remains open to this day. And tighten your seatbelt now. More new information has just been revealed that might bring this cold case to trial again with new suspects. And again, it was a podcast that was part of it all. And next week, I'm going to tell you how a group of high school students in the area started a podcast about this case and how that podcast uncovered new information into the case of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. You will not want to miss this coming episode. It is a wild and crazy ride into a mystery that has not been saved to this day, but just might be solved. I'll let you decide that for yourself. In closing, let me say again, please make sure that when you send your kids somewhere, you think of their safety. Make sure proper security is there to protect them, regardless of the place you send them, school, scouts, church, wherever. Make sure those responsible have security as their priority. Make that your responsibility. Don't just take for granted the people you send them to who have taken those steps. Ask questions. Heck, volunteer yourself to work with them in providing security. So until this time next week, when there's more information now that could turn this cold case into a hot case. This is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.